Welcome, everybody. My name is Lynn Kronberger. I am the Chief Development Officer here at WAMU. As a public media organization, our mission is to connect listeners and members like you to each other around the world. Public radio works because listeners and members who value the service step up and give back. And support from listeners and members is our most reliable and important source of funding, especially right now. This book club would not be possible if we did not have your support. So if you've been enjoying these monthly book clubs, please consider making a gift. You can give at www.dianerehm.org/give. We are grateful for the over 1,158 people who registered to join us today. Just so you know, this event is being recorded and streamed on Facebook. Closed caption is available. Just click the button on your screen. And now let's start the discussion with the host of our book club, Diane Rehm.
Thank you, Lynn, and welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to have you with us again for our June book club. Klara and the Sun is the new novel by Kazuo Ishiguro. It's his first since winning the 2017 Nobel Prize. Told from the perspective of a humanoid robot, Ishiguro pushes us to consider questions about our relationship to technology, loneliness, and what makes each of us unique. Joining me today, Rumaan Alam, author of 3 novels, including Leave the World Behind. Maureen Corrigan, she's book critic for NPR's Fresh Air and distinguished professor of literary criticism at Georgetown University. And Dr. Kate Darling, research specialist at the MIT Media Lab and author of The New Breed, What Our History with Animals Reveals About Our Future with Robots. And of course, we will be taking your comments throughout the hour. You can click at the bottom of your screen on the Q&A, and your questions will get to us. We've already had a number submitted from our viewers and listeners, so we'll try to get to as many as possible. So now, let's get right to our discussion. And first of all, I want to know how each of you felt about this book. And Maureen, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Diane. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about this book and to be back on the book club. I started my Fresh Air review of Klara and the Sun by saying, this is unbearable. And I do almost feel that about every book that Kazuo Ishiguro writes. He writes about loneliness, fragility, human limitation so powerfully that it is almost unbearable. But what draws us, or at least me, into this novel is the presence of Klara, our narrator, who is, I guess, for shorthand's sake, you would call a robot, but is known in the novel as an artificial friend. And she's such a poignant, sensitive, pure presence that, again, I felt like I feel at the end of every Ishiguro novel, oh my God, he can't possibly top this. It's so spectacular.
And Rumaan, to you.
I, similarly to Maureen, felt almost unbearably moved by this book. And I will say, though, it didn't feel that way to me initially. It took some warming to the book for me to understand. But by the end, I really felt like I was sort of unable to handle it. And in fact, it's a book that I forced my husband to read because I needed somebody else to. I was reviewing the book, and so I had read it before it came out, and there was no one else for me to talk to about it. And so I forced him to read it so that he could sort of experience it with me, because it just felt so so dislocating and so unsettling, so moving, as Ishiguro's books so often do feel that way to me.
And to you, Kate Darling.
I totally agree with Rumaan, because I also, like, my husband wouldn't read it, but I would tell him about every chapter as I read it. And when I started, I was very, very pregnant, and he kept saying, "Are you sure you want to read this? This it seems like it might turn out to be really sad." But I genuinely loved the book. I'm such a sucker for the genre of, well, I don't know if we're calling it science fiction. To me, this is very science fiction, but it's the type of near-term science fiction that uses technology as a tool, and the whole setting as a tool to kind of examine society and people and the human condition. And Klara does such a good job of that. I mean, she's such a great device, literally and figuratively. I really love the book.
And we may see that beautiful little baby that you recently gave birth to before this hour is over. One idea that I didn't get at first, and I wonder whether you got the word lifted and what it meant. It seemed to me a single word that was central to the whole discussion of why Josie, one of the major characters, needed an artificial friend. Were you confused by that, Rumaan?
I think because of my familiarity with Ishiguro's work, I understood that it held some meaning. Readers who also read Never Let Me Go will remember that that book also deploys certain very specific language like carer or donation early in the book. And it's only as the book unfolds that you understand that donation means organ donation, and that carer means someone who's prepared to sacrifice their life because they are simply a sort of vessel for organs from which to be harvested. So in this book, Lifted, which seems to describe some kind of surgical or other medical intervention to increase a human's capabilities. It's so interesting, as Kate said, that the book gestures towards science fiction, but I don't think that Ishiguro is actually sincerely interested in it. I think he simply suggests that this is a reality for the humans inside of the book, because he's applying a kind of moral pressure on the characters inside of the book. So it's not really a book about thinking through what society that entails this kind of genetic modification would actually look like. It's simply to make you feel something for a character in peril. So I think that's something that he's done before, and it's very clever.
But it's clear that what he means by lifted is enhancing the potential, the brain power of the child. What was your reaction, Maureen?
Well, I want to say, in addition to everything Rumaan pointed out so eloquently, that oftentimes, right, in Ishiguro's work, you're not quite sure what the terrain is, and you're not always quite sure what the vocabulary absolutely means. And especially in this novel, where we're seeing everything through the perspective of Klara, the artificial friend, again, kind of the robot, for lack of a better word. We're not going to understand everything. And in that sense, one of the things that Ishiguro pulls off so beautifully is he reminds us that we as humans, we see through a glass darkly. We don't understand everything either, even though we think we do. I also took lifted to mean a hierarchy of class, that the folks who were lifted were the folks who were in charge, in a sense, at least in an intellectual class. And they could afford things like an artificial friend, whereas there was obviously a class below them who was keeping things going, who didn't have such luxuries.
And indeed, that's why Josie's mother watched Klara so closely, wanting to know how well she could interact with her daughter, Josie, who had been lifted. But there's another central factor which we don't learn until a little later, which is that Josie's sister has died. And Kate, I wonder how you reacted to that knowledge, knowing that she died after having been lifted, as apparently some children did.
Yeah, it was, I mean, I just love the way his books kind of reveal the story as it goes along, and this whole question of lifting in the society, and the risks that it apparently entails, and it just I would actually push back a little bit on Rumaan saying that he's not interested in it. It's not central to the story. It's not the point. So he is using it like as a tool. I think you're right, to show the character's pain and responses to it. But it does seem really well thought out, these near-term kind of societal shifts where technology raises these new questions about, how can we enhance ourselves, and how far would we go as parents to want to put our children in like the upper class? Would we risk maybe even their lives to do so? So it does make you think about a lot of that, as it's just happening kind of in the background of the story.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rumaan.
Well, yes, as Kate said, that's exactly what's so interesting about it, I think, is that you're right. He clearly understands the universe that he's constructing, but we only glimpse it. We only barely understand that this book is set in the United States. We only barely understand that Josie's father apparently belongs to a class of people who have been made redundant by a class of artificial labor. The book says that, but it's sort of behind this haze. And so you do latch onto it and want to make it mean something, but in a strange way, it seems to not mean a ton for what the book is actually trying to accomplish. But I think you're right, Kate, like it holds together. I think he's woven something complete. He's just not necessarily showing it to us.
I thought one of the most difficult scenes for me to read was when Josie invites her dearest friend, Rick, who lives nearby and who has not been lifted, to meet with a group of lifted children. The parents, the adults, are in the so-called kitchen, and the youngsters, all Josie's age, are in a separate room, and they sure don't take to Rick, do they, Maureen?
No, they don't. It reminded me of some play dates that I watched my daughter endure, and I hope Kate doesn't have her future with her new baby. But it can be very painful when you see children suddenly change and gang up on the outsider. And what I really cherished about that scene was how Klara kept mulling it over. Why did Josie, a young girl who she knows as being caring and lovely and polite, why did she shift that way? And if I can, there's just a sentence or two where Klara is mulling this over the next day about this change in Josie, and she thinks to herself, not only had I learned that changes were part of Josie and that I should be ready to accommodate them, I also began to understand that this wasn't a trait particular just to Josie, that people often felt the need to prepare a side of themselves to display to passers-by as they might in a store window, and that such a display needn't be taken so seriously once the moment had passed. And of course, because Klara herself has been on sale in a store window as a product, as an artificial friend, that's where that metaphor comes from for that kind of almost falseness that we sometimes protectively put on in front of others.
And what do we think of the role in Clara's mind that the sun plays, Kate?
That the son plays in the whole book.
Yeah.
This is the piece that I would have liked other people to talk to you about the most. There seems to be a religious aspect to it. It also it ties into the technology and that she's solar powered. But I'm so curious to hear what other people thought of the clearly, like, it's in the book title, the sun plays a huge role, but
Yeah.
I bet that someone else could articulate it in a much more, I don't know, profound way than I could.
Well, I think it's so funny that a book that seems to be about technology, is about technology in some fashion, becomes a book that's about faith. And I'm not sure that I think that Ishiguro has written about faith in quite this way in the rest of the body of work, but it just so very clearly felt to me that Clara's relationship to the sun was sacred. And the scenes where she enters the barn, for example, to sort of pray for Josie's deliverance, it's as though the book is describing standing in a cathedral. And so it felt really overt to me that it was talking about faith, and that felt surprising and unexpected and strangely not that common in the contemporary novel.
It may be simplistic, but I feel like Ishiguro has been moving more and more in this direction. I feel like his last novel, The Buried Giant, which was almost kind of a medieval fantasy tale, had that aspect of something beyond, to it. And what is so, I think, rare in the way he writes about the scene that Rumaan just described is that we readers read that and we think, oh, Clara's praying to the sun, isn't this sad? Isn't this pointless? And yet that's not how he writes it. He doesn't write it in a, in a kind of a snide way or dismissive way. It's so poignant, and it does, again, bring us back to ourselves, maybe those moments in our own lives where we've desperately prayed for intervention, to avert a terrible possibility. It's very, again, pure. I keep using that word for this novel and for Klara, but that's how it feels to me.
Well, and when she was in the store waiting to be chosen, the manager kept encouraging her and telling her how wonderful a job she was doing as she sat in that front window awaiting the sun's rays to come. She felt that right from the beginning. Now, I want to read to you one question we received from Lawrence, who says, Klara combines an astounding sense of empathy with utter selfishness and devotion. Could you please comment on the notion that Klara is not only the most human of characters in the book, but that she is an idealized or aspirational version of humanity? She seemed like a saint or prophet who walked among us.
Hard to add to that. Well, if you're going to create an artificial friend, don't you want them to be that way? You don't. Some of the artificial friends, as we all know, in the beginning of the story in the department store are flawed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
certainly Klara is the one I would want.
I didn't feel that Klara was necessarily to represent a kind of ideal of humanity. I wrote about this book for the New Republic, and I said this in my review. I feel that Klara, in some ways, is sort of the prototype, is an idealized parental figure. That her relationship to Josie is fundamentally parental, maternal, I guess in this case. The ways in which she prays for Josie's deliverance from danger. I mean, I'm not a person with any particular faith at all. And when my younger son had to have surgery, you know, like, I don't know how to describe the 45 minutes I spent waiting for him to come out of surgery, except for to say that I was in this sort of catatonia akin to what we see Klara do in the barn, which is just to say, something has to save this person that I care about more than anything. And there's so much in this book that feels to me that it is about the parent and about the parent's inevitable obsolescence, because a parent, just like an old model of cell phone, is doomed to be discarded.
Kate, do I understand that you spoke directly with Ishiguro?
I did, yeah. I got to interview him on his book tour.
Tell me what you talked about with him.
Oh, we talked about so much different stuff. I was so surprised to learn that he has never read the children's book Corduroy, because the beginning of the book is so similar. I thought I was sure it was an homage to Corduroy, but he's never read it. We talked a lot about, well, one of the things that kind of ties into what we were just talking about is the kind of Klara's role and you know, what type of figure she is. And my interest in her role was really in how other people perceived her, because it seemed like in society, some people perceived her as a child or a friend. Some people perceived her as a device, a tool, a pet, a servant. She had a lot of different roles. And so we talked about what it means to have kind of this undecided society that is dealing with these lifelike technologies coming into their lives and not really knowing how to situate them, but kind of subconsciously just doing something and depending on the context. So that was really interesting to me, because a lot of my work deals with how people perceive robots and how they treat them, and how people subconsciously treat robots like they're alive, even though they know that they're just machines. And comparing that to animals, how we've treated a lot of animals like tools and products, and some of them like companions. We're starting to do the same with robots. And so that the role of Klara in that world was really interesting to me.
And of course, my little Bella is as close to me as any friend or acquaintance. I mean, I talk to her all the time. She never talks back, but that's okay. I was interested when Rick met Vance outside the theater, that a whole group of people were going to, and one of the ushers, I think she was an usher, said, "I hope you're not trying to bring this robot into the theater." And it made me think of Black Lives Matter and the extent to which certain stratas, certain cultures, certain people are pushed out of society. And Klara was certainly being pushed there. I wonder how you saw that, Maureen. The father plays an important role here.
The father is such an interesting figure because at first he's so much on the margins, and you don't quite know why. And you also don't quite know why he's so hostile to Klara at first. And, so I found myself disliking him because I was so bonded with Klara. But then you realize that the ultimate plan is for Klara to be kind of the backup in case Josie too dies, as her sister did, and that Klara will have subsumed so many of Josie's personality traits that she can almost function as a stand-in. And of course, that's horrific. But you also understand Josie's mother's desperate longing not to lose her and to keep her in some fashion if she should die. It also raises those big questions that Ishiguro always raises about what makes us human, what constitutes morality. I mean, he's always going after those big questions that never sound very interesting when you just summarize them, but when he dramatizes them, you can hardly read this book and breathe at the same time in certain passages.
Remember how Melania, a housekeeper, was warning Klara about the artist who was supposedly painting little Josie and saying, make sure not to leave her alone with him. And then we learn the reason he is creating this image of Josie. I found that just shocking. But maybe you, Kate, working as you are in the robotic field and comparing them, contrasting them with animals, were not shocked at all.
I wasn't shocked, but I loved the way that he dealt with this topic, which was so different from all of the tropes that we have in a lot of science fiction. A lot of science fiction uses robots to think about what it means to be human. And there's often the question of, can we recreate a human, or is there something that's unique about us? And what is it that makes us special? And the answer is usually either that humans have a soul or some other stand-in for that can't be recreated, or that there is no relevant difference. And then it becomes like a comparison to, civil rights movements. And that's what science fiction has done so far. But what Ishiguro did was so different in that he looks at it through this lens of grief, first of all, but also the answer that he gives to the question of what makes us unique, or the answer that Klara gives to the question at the end of the book. Actually, so maybe I can just read that part. It's at the very end. She's talking to manager, and she says,
"Where are they? Do you know where they are?"
I don't think they do. They say the word. They know. It's just kind of. You kind of infer that they might be in some sort of junkyard, but it's never actually described or said. And she says, Mr. Capaldi, this artist, this or engineer, or whatever he is, he believed there was nothing special inside Josie that couldn't be continued. He told the mother he'd searched and searched and found nothing like that. But I believe now he was searching in the wrong place. There was something very special, but it wasn't inside Josie. It was inside those who loved her. So the answer that he gives to what makes us special is our relationships and the way that other people feel about us. And I found that just such a refreshing and profound answer to this trope that I'd seen so much. And it also, for me personally, it immediately raised the question of whether that applies only to humans. Does that apply to Diane's dog? Does it apply to something made of just machine and parts? Does it matter what's inside? Or could the relationship that we have with things actually give them this uniqueness and make them special in a way that is, profound?
Kate, I've been wondering that myself. especially in relation to my dog. This dog was given to me by my husband 3 years ago. I have never in my whole life, and I've had dogs all my life, had a sweeter, more kind, more gentle, playful dog. Everybody in this building loves her. And I find myself wondering whether she is the way she is because of genetic inheritance, or am I different? Have I raised a pup from a different point in my life with a different show of affection and caring that perhaps has made her as she is? And that sort of question took me to one from Julia, who says, I was struck by how accurate the portrayal of old age was. That is, how Clara's retirement years strongly resembled those of my 93-year-old mother. When manager visits her, it's clear Klara has all she needs to be in her spot with her memories. I would not have imagined such a parallel, but clearly most of us cannot imagine so much of what Ishiguro is able to write for us. Maureen?
Well, as you read that question or that comment, Diane, again, I think back to the last novel Ishiguro wrote, The Buried Giant, which was very much about old age, an elderly married couple whose memories kind of go in and out. And the way Ishiguro dramatized that in a fantasy story was so vivid and powerful. He's always got these plots where people are having to say goodbye, or people or creatures are having to say goodbye to their own lives, to their former existences. As I say that, I just have to give Rumaan a plug because his marvelous novel that came out this year, Leave the World Behind, was so powerful about the sudden break in ordinary existence that his characters in present time were enjoying. And, kind of almost in miniature, I feel like, Rumaan, you did a lot of what you touched on, a lot of what Ishiguro is touching on here, just the loss and the adjustment to loss that your characters quickly were asked to do is really part of what is going on in that final scene that Kate just read.
Oh, well, that's a very generous assessment. I do think you're right that Ishiguro is really adept at writing about memory and the passage of time. And the thing that is so remarkable to me when you look at the whole body of work, because I reread all of his books just before I read Klara, it's never about extraordinary memory. It's always about really quotidian things. In Never Let Me Go, the children in this school are deeply attached to like rubbish, like things that are brought in for effectively like a yard sale, and they form these very deep attachments to these like art projects, childish art projects that they make, and they carry the memory of like a certain cassette tape with them throughout their adulthood. It's an extraordinary thing because it's not about, or in Remains of the Day, which I think is probably his best book, it's not about the climactic moment of betrayal or heartbreak. It's about these tiny little granular things about human existence, which I think is what makes the book so effective to readers, because you don't have to try to imagine into the unrequited love of two servants in a grand household in post-war England. you're just thinking about what it feels like to love somebody or be a human being. And that is what he is so good at. And so even though I think this is a book about, as we were saying, like technology and morality and where is the soul, it's also just a book about people having these very tiny human interactions. And again, it's human interactions, which is funny because it's about a robot.
And Kate, what did you think of Josie's mother?
Well, again, I read it while I was pregnant, so I really, really felt for her, even though, you know, she was, or maybe because she was, you know, flawed in some ways, and just, you know, you know, it's in the beginning, it's really hard to relate to her. She seems very strict, and then you just gradually realize that she just wants so desperately just the best for her children,
And she's lost one daughter and
yeah.
doesn't want to lose another, but somehow the idea of creating a replica through the artificial friend, through Klara, I don't know, it sort of hit me oddly.
This is already happening, though. There are already, you know, startups trying to scrape people's social media profiles to recreate an AI of someone who has passed away. And the show Black Mirror has a fantastic episode where they bring that into the robotics as well, where someone who she loses her husband, and she ends up getting a robot replica, and so they deal with that. I think it is something that is coming as a question, because I guess that I can't imagine wanting that in grief, but some people apparently do. So I think it's going to happen as soon as we have the technology.
You think it is going to happen?
Well, I don't think we're anywhere close to being able to replicate humans, even just a fictional human. We're nowhere near where people think we are with robotic technology today, but I think that people might try to find something like a chatbot that could, you know, have the same rapport as they had with someone they lost, or and like I said, there are companies already working on this.
Rumaan, you also spoke with Ishiguro. What was your conversation like?
Oh, I wish I could remember in greater detail. I was so sort of starstruck and moved. I hadn't really considered prior to this conversation what he meant to me as an artist and as a writer. And I was sort of like overwhelmed to actually talk to him. He's very, I think this is probably true for so many artists. I think that he has a desire to let the work speak for itself. And he writes this kind of work that invites a lot of questions and that people want to do. That's all of his books are great book club books because there's so much to discuss. But I get the sense that he feels that he has left it in the book and that his job is done. One thing that we did talk about, and Kate, I wonder if this came up when you spoke to him about Corduroy, is that the initial, I don't think you can say the idea for the book, but like the germ of the book was in his desire to write a book for children. And he had spoken to his daughter, who's also a novelist, and she had told him like, whatever nutshell story he had described about a robot and a child, his daughter had said to him, that's too sad. You can't write that as a book for children. And so that became this book that we're talking about today. And I think you can see what I see in the relationship between like childhood text and this book is the presence of a narrative voice that is so in control that it makes me think of the parent voice reading to their child, right? When children experience text in picture book form, they're not actually experiencing it via the author, they're hearing it through whoever the adult is reading it to them. And so that adult voice has all of this power and control over the story. Kate mentioned Corduroy. In Corduroy, this stuffed bear doesn't even know, he's riding up an escalator and he says like, I guess I've always wanted to climb a mountain. I guess this is a mountain. And it's so sweet because the reader knows that it's not a mountain, it's an escalator. But when I read that book to my sons, they heard me reading that. And that feels to me akin to what Ishiguro does in all of his books. It's this like pure authorial control of, I'm going to tell you a story, and then very slowly the story is going to unspool. You're going to discover that these characters who you love are actually genetically engineered machines to harvest organs from. You're going to discover that this butler's great employer was a Nazi collaborator. And it's just sort of amazing how that works. And yeah, I really enjoyed talking to him. He's, in addition to being an extraordinary artist, an artist of the very highest caliber, I think I love to add that he's an extremely kind person, was really generous, was really willing to listen to my very amateur questions about his book. So he's a great guy.
Oh, he was so sweet. He was like, don't feel like you need to read the book. And I was like, are you? What? Of course I read the book.
And Maureen, can you describe what Ishiguro calls an interaction and the kind, what we learn of the interaction that goes on at Josie's house?
Sorry, I don't know if you pitched that question to anybody in particular, Diane.
Oh, I did, Maureen. I pitched it to you. I'm sorry.
I didn't, my sound must have cut off. The interaction is like a play date, that it's where children are in this contrived way brought together, sounds familiar, and the parents are in the next room, and they're dutifully trying to let the children work out all of their issues themselves, without intervening, which also means that the children can gang up on each other. They can form cliques. They can get pleasure out of isolating one or more of the other children. And Ishiguro must have a wonderful memory for when his daughter was young, because it all felt very, very authentic to me. It's also a way in this very strange society for any kind of human interaction to happen. It seems like it all has to be orchestrated.
Yeah.
Very,
today.
yeah.
But the interaction between Rick and Josie seemed very genuine, seemed
Yes.
very real, as two good friends
Yes,
coming
yes.
together.
Yes, and as so often happens with two good friends in childhood, I think maybe especially when one is a boy and one is a girl, and one is of a higher class and one isn't, they drift apart as adolescence takes hold, and one goes on to a future that includes higher education and the other one doesn't.
But going back to this word lifted, why would you need some kind of surgery to be lifted if you're just talking about class and you're not talking about intellectual ability? I mean, Maureen?
I'm thinking about so many things, including what Kate said about our future, kind of prolonging some kind of connection with those who are lost to us, and how technology does that. Think about how, well, I'll say it. I think about how my students at Georgetown, for instance, many of them from privileged backgrounds, have enjoyed some kind of enhancement, whether it's some work on nose jobs or dermatological interventions, or something to make them more conforming to an ideal of the physical body. We all do that to a certain extent, but it's not so preposterous, I think, to imagine that in order to be more at home in this higher class, some tinkering needs to be done. And if you can afford it and you're willing to take the risk, It'll make life easier for your child.
But why?
I mean, that's how dentistry works in this country, even right now. Dentistry is not considered part of our healthcare. And so if you have the ability to pay $5,000 for your children to get braces at adolescence, then they walk through adulthood with perfectly straight teeth. And that's a significant advantage, you know? And so I think in some ways, we're already there, aren't we?
Here is a question from Karen, who says, I'm struck by the various levels at which this book can be read, from simple to profound. Can any of you talk about this use of narrative by Ishiguro and perhaps the merits of reading it simply? I'm not sure if I'm expressing this question clearly, but if anyone sees what I'm saying, I'd love to hear. Rumaan, it certainly looks as though.
Yes, I could not. I think this happens to be one of this writer's particular strengths, is that most of his work, I think maybe with the possible exception of The Unconsoled, you could read if you were a very casual reader. If you read 3 novels a year, and there are plenty of Americans who do that, and you could pick up one of his books and get a lot out of it. Feel really moved, feel really like it could deliver all that a great novel can deliver. At the same time, as I said earlier, the books are all extremely good book club books. They have a real depth to them the further you push into them. And I think that is part of his genius. I really do. I think that is part of what makes him an extraordinary writer. And so I think I understand what this question is talking about, which is like, can you simply enjoy this book as a book about a robot who loves a girl who is a tool in the household in some other future? And I think that you absolutely can. And that's an extraordinary thing, because I think you can enjoy the book as that and also find in the book so much about like ethics and our relationship to technology, about parental love, about love generally, about unconditional love, about whether we have a soul, about what faith is. So I think the book provides both of those things. All of his books are so elastic like that. It's extraordinary.
Kate, do you want to add to that?
Oh, just to say that I probably read it simply, since I'm not a book critic. But I agree that I also got the feeling that, I like the way that you put it, that this elasticity where you can make it as, profound and complex as you want to. It's kind of like a Pixar movie, where it works for the little kids and it works for the adults, and everything in between.
Maureen?
Yeah, I'll just add that so many of our great novels work that way too. I mean, I think that's one of the marks of greatness. And I will put in a plug for The Great Gatsby, which when it first came out in 1925 was reviewed by most reviewers as a murder story, a crime story. 3 violent deaths, a gangster as our main character, etc. The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett, which is a straightforward detective story. Boy, you read that a second time and you see that Hammett is also playing with images of the void and post World War I, questioning the existence of God. I mean, so many novels, so many great works of art work this way, and it's to their credit.
And Betty writes, I was a little lost at the end. Did the mother put Klara out to pasture because she had fulfilled her purpose? Will she experience the slow fade, or is the presence of all that machinery ominous? Why is the manager limping or tilting or whatever she's doing? I found that fascinating, that limp that the manager had, but was she putting Klara out to pasture? What did you think, Kate?
Yeah, I understood it as Klara being a device that has a certain, lifespan, and that, not only had she served her purpose, but she was also kind of breaking down and not functioning as well as she used to. And there were newer models of these artificial friends. And I think that, she probably would have wound up in this slow fade situation either way. It's not just the mother. I think this is probably what happens to all of the AFs, is how I understood it.
What do you think she was made of?
What do I think she was made of? Well, it's so interesting how he does go into the technical aspects a little bit, a tiny bit, enough to make me go, oh wow, he did think this through, like the grid vision and the solar power and the way that it's difficult for the AFs to navigate new situations or gravel. I mean, it's just that's what robots struggle with today, is navigating new spaces until they've done it a few times. So I thought it was very realistic and well thought out, but he doesn't go into it in great detail because it's not important to the story.
And of course, in a sense, Klara, by giving up the fluid from her neck to the father to stop those pollution machines, just one, though there were thousands, she gave her life. She gave her life for Josie. But was she just put out to pasture, Maureen, to fade?
I think she was. I think she was. I mean, all of you keep mentioning corduroy. I keep thinking of the Giving Tree, that other child story where the tree just gives and gives and gives of itself until it basically dies, right? I think she was put out to pasture, and maybe you could say that's the fate that happens to all of us after a while. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be glib about it because this book is so not glib, but there is an end to things. Ishiguro always insists on that, and there's an end to Klara here.
So that we cannot immortalize even her humanity. I mean, it's a curious way to put it, but she seemed as though she was the most human of every single character in that book, Rumaan.
But to die is sort of a fundamental aspect of to be human. And so it's not, we don't have a feeling about her the way that we do about an obsolete iPod that's sitting in our closet. We have a feeling about her exactly as we would, as she does for Josie, which is we loved her, we were charmed by her, and then she has to go away. But that's sort of what it is to be human, and that's why it's so effective, I think. And I'm so happy Maureen mentioned The Giving Tree, because I mentioned that in my review for the New Republic as well. I feel like that is the text that this book is most akin to for me, because it dramatizes what it is to be human as sacrifice, as care for love. And I understood it as parental, but of course you don't have to be a parent to be a human being. We all experience what it is to love and to give, and you give until there's nothing left, and then life kind of concludes. And it's an extraordinary, grim thing seen by one perspective, but it's also kind of beautiful and transcendent from another perspective. I think Klara would be very satisfied, and she says she's very satisfied by the life that she's had. And what brings her satisfaction is that she was of use to the salvation of the life of this girl who she so loved. And so she sees that as a life well lived. And so she doesn't even resent knocking around in the utility closet upstairs where she can't even see out of a window. She still sees it as like a job well done.
Yeah. And finally, from Sonia, the U.S. is suffering a crisis of care for children, elders, and those with disabilities and chronic illness. We largely rely on immigrants to do these jobs, who often leave families behind. Klara has no family ties and thus is able to devote herself entirely to Josie. Though the family is grateful to Klara, when Josie recovers from her mysterious illness, Klara is still left to end her days in the yard, a virtual junk heap. Is Ishiguro in this way commenting on the way we treat those on whom we depend for care? Maureen?
I think the only answer is could be, you know, you could ask, is Ishiguro commenting on contemporary America? I mean, the vision that he gives us in this book is of an America that's riven by factions and seems to be run by some kind of quasi-fascist government. I mean, could be. It could be a commentary on how we treat underpaid caregivers in this country on whom we depend so much. I also just want to say one quick thing about the end of Klara and the sadness of that moment, you know, that it is, as Rumaan said, part of being human, that we end, that life ends. But that's why we have art. You know, when you have this novel, Klara doesn't end completely because, again, to be glib, someone else is going to pick up this novel and the story starts again. She lives on. And I think that's beautiful.
What would another Ishiguro book be that you would recommend to our listeners? First to you, Rumaan.
Well, you can't go wrong with any of his books, but The Remains of the Day is a truly extraordinary book. Even if you've seen the movie, don't watch the movie, read the book. It's an extraordinary book about life, and it's so slender and so capacious. It's such an extraordinary book. I cannot recommend that one highly enough.
And to you, Maureen.
I would second that. You can't go wrong. I'll vote for Never Let Me Go, which is a story based on a deep friendship between a boy and a girl. And we eventually learned, right, that they're in this situation. I don't want to ruin it, but which is very, very much akin to Klara's. And it's a powerful novel about selflessness and, again, kind of the limitations of life.
And you, Kate.
I recommend his other book, The Giving Tree. No, I second Never Let Me Go. My father, who reads a lot, has said that it's the saddest book he's read in his life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I so want to thank each and every one of you for being with us today. It was a great discussion and I just loved it. Rumaan Alam, Maureen Corrigan, Kate Darling, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. And before you all, our listeners, go, please take a moment to fill out a short survey about this event. It's going to pop up on your screen, and if you would consider donating to WAMU, your financial support is what makes it possible for us to continue to bring gifts to you like this one. Go to dianerehm.org/give. The book club is going to be on a hiatus for July and August. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, September 29th. Stay tuned to your email for details. Rashad Young is our engineer today, and Zhang is our events coordinator, with support from Virendra Silva, Julia Slattery, Melissa Glass, Lynn Kronberger, Brian Colombo, and Michelle Morgan. Our producers have been Allison Brody and Rebecca Kaufman. And to Rebecca, or Becca as we know her, we bid a very sad farewell today. For 9 years, she's been a producer of the Diane Rehm Show, mentored the podcast, and now lent her extraordinary talent to the book club. We're going to miss her so much, and we wish her all success in the future. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you right back here in September. Have a great day.